Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Bill Barabalt, president of the Richard Nixon Foundation. I want to thank you for joining us here this evening to celebrate the greatest comeback. First, I'd like to welcome the Esperanza High School Air Force JROTC, who will present the colors. And to those seated, please stand for the presentation of our colors and the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Wasn't that beautiful? Thank you, Alexandra Castle, for that stirring rendition of our national anthem. We're here this evening to celebrate what historians have termed the greatest comeback. On this day, 50 years ago, Richard Nixon accepted his party's nomination for the presidency for the second time. Just 6 years after he himself said that his political life was over, he won back his reputation, with his party united behind him and confident in his chances for victory. 50 years ago today, at the Republican National Convention in Miami, the former vice president delivered an iconic, far-ranging speech that laid out his vision and his goals for his presidency. Standing before his family, his party, and his country, Richard Nixon accepted the Republican nomination. We have pulled together some of the most moving moments of his speech from that night.
Tonight, I again proudly accept that nomination for President of the United States. As we look at America, we see cities enveloped in smoke and flame. We hear sirens in the night. We see Americans dying on distant battlefields abroad. We see Americans hating each other, fighting each other, killing each other at home. And as we see and hear these things, millions of Americans cry out in anguish. Did we come all this way for this? Did American boys die in Normandy and Korea and in Valley Forge for this? Listen to the answer to those questions. It is another voice. It is a quiet voice in the tumult of the shouting. It is the voice of the great majority of Americans, the forgotten Americans, the non-shouters, the non-demonstrators. They're not racist or sick. They're not guilty of the crime that plagues the land. They are black, they're white. They're native-born and foreign-born. They're young and they're old. They work in America's factories. They run America's businesses. They serve in government. They provide most of the soldiers who died to keep us free. They give drive to the spirit of America. They give lift to the American dream. They give steel to the backbone of America. They're good people. They're decent people. They work and they save and they pay their taxes and they care. When the strongest nation in the world can be tied down for 4 years in a war in Vietnam with no end in sight, when the richest nation in the world can't manage its own economy, when the nation with the greatest tradition of the rule of law is plagued by unprecedented lawlessness, when a nation has been known for a century for equality of opportunity is torn by unprecedented racial violence, and when the President of the United States cannot travel abroad or to any major city at home without fear of a hostile demonstration, then it's time for new leadership for the United States of America. Tonight, I see the face of a child. He lives in a great city. He's black, or he's white. He's Mexican, Italian, Polish. None of that matters. What matters, he's an American child. That child in that great city is more important than any politician's promise. He is America. He is a poet. He's a scientist. He's a great teacher. He's a proud craftsman. He's everything we ever hoped to be and everything we dare to dream to be. He sleeps the sleep of childhood. He dreams the dreams of a child. And yet when he awakens to a living nightmare of poverty, neglect, and despair. He fails in school. He ends up on welfare. For him, the American system is one that feeds his stomach and starves his soul. It breaks his heart. And in the end, it may take his life on some distant battlefield. To millions of children in this rich land, this is their prospect for the future. But this is only part of what I see in America. I see another child tonight. He hears the train go by at night, and he dreams of faraway places where he'd like to go. Seems like an impossible dream. But he is helped on his journey through life. A father who had to go to work before he finished the 6th grade sacrificed everything he had so that his sons could go to college. A gentle Quaker mother with a passionate concern for peace quietly wept when he went to war, but she understood why he had to go. A great teacher, a remarkable football coach, an inspirational minister, encouraged him on his way. A courageous wife and loyal children stood by him in victory and also in defeat. And in his chosen profession of politics, first there were scores, and then hundreds, then thousands, and finally millions worked for his success. And tonight, he stands before you, nominated for President of the United States of America. You can see why I believe so deeply in the American dream.
And in November of that year, Richard Nixon went on to win a triumphant victory that the New York Times said was one of the greatest personal comebacks in the history of American politics. Or, as James Reston called it, the greatest comeback since Lazarus. As you heard, then candidate Nixon was acutely aware that his journey from a small house that his father built in rural Yorba Linda, then rural, to candidate for President of the United States was a uniquely American story. And as president, Richard Nixon was determined to maintain and to enable the American dream for future generations, for all Americans from all walks of life and all backgrounds. Americans like Michelle Steele, who immigrated to this country alone as a teenager from South Korea and spent her early years working in a clothing store to pay her way through college. Now Michelle Steele is a distinguished member of the Orange County Board of Supervisors and served as chair in 2017. She'd previously served on the California State Board of Equalization, where she was the highest-ranking Republican woman in California and the highest-ranking Korean-American elected official in the nation. Please welcome Michelle Steele.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much. And I am very happy and I'm very honored to be here, and especially sharing the stage with Honorable Judge Jim Rogan. That I have been known him more than 30 years now. My first kid who is sitting here, actually, she was in my stomach at that time. And, you know, he used to be our kids' like uncle who used to draw Mickey Mouse face, you know, at the restaurant. So I remember that, and thank you for sharing. I'm glad that I'm speaking before he does, because he's such a funny, great speaker, and I cannot really follow after him. So we are here today to honor the legacy of President Richard Nixon, a maverick in his own right. He believed America represents freedom, opportunity, and individuality. As a first-generation immigrant, I know this to be true. I was born in Korea, and I was raised in Japan, and came here to go to college. So I speak Korean as my first language, and Japanese my second, and English my third. I came here to study. I ended up stuck here because I'm married to my husband. So with my experience, Americans have proven time and again that they are capable of achieving success. What we have all learned is that the best way to be successful is for the government to stay out of our way. People always ask me, as a first generation, why you run for State Board of Equalization? Especially as a first generation with a big, thick accent, because I remember that I was going out against Sanctuary State. One lady called me that, you know, I'm a big racist to be on the top of that without speaking English really well. How did you get elected? That's the way they asked me. My mother, who came here, she was a teacher in Korea and in Japan, and she was a Korean literature teacher, so she didn't speak English at all. But she has to support 3 daughters. And my father passed away in Japan as a diplomat. That was the only post. That's why I was raised in Japan. And she opened up the clothing shop because her friend owns the wholesale men's clothing store. So anybody wants me to fix men's clothes here, I know how to do alteration. That's what I did. I was a salesperson. I was hiring, firing. I did buying, selling. I just did everything there. So my mom opened that clothing store for about 5 years, and then she was ready to move on to 5 working days shop. That's a building sandwich shop, because she couldn't spend much time with 3 daughters that we all helping, but we were very busy in the store every day, 7 days a week. That's what first generations do. So my mom closed down the clothing shop, and then she opened the sandwich shop. It's 5 days per week, and only short time because they serve only breakfast and lunch. She knew only bread was white bread, but she opened that this is Jewish deli in downtown Los Angeles, Jewelry Mart, and she didn't have a clue about pita bread and other stuffs. But that's a long story, so I'm not gonna talk about it. But she closed down the clothing shop, and when you close down, what happened? Inventory goes down. So she paid the taxes accordingly, because her sales tax report is going down because her sales went down. Few months later, she got hit by state board of equalization that you used to pay this much taxes, you didn't pay, so you cheated. So you owe us taxes plus interest and penalty on the top of it. So first generation, you don't speak English, what do? You pay the taxes that you didn't owe, plus interest and penalty on the top of it. So guess what I did? I followed why government is on the way and government is harassing dishonest taxpayers. And then when that seat opened, I told my husband, I'm running for that seat to help small business owners. My husband's jaw dropped because he's been in politics. He was actually in 1968 in Miami. He was at the convention. So he's been in politics all his life since he was small. And he couldn't believe that his wife, first generation, who has a thick accent in her English, tried to run for public office. I didn't know anything. I asked him, what do I have to do to run for this position? He said, nothing. Nobody knows what State Board of Equalization does, and you don't have to do anything. I said, do I have to raise money? He said, of course not. You don't even have to do campaigns, so why you have to raise money? I said, do I have to speak in front of people? He said, oh, nobody cares about that, Sid, so you don't have to speak. Maybe he lied or he didn't really know. I said, oh my God, you don't have to raise money and you don't have to speak. That's just perfect position for me. So I decided to run with the compassion, and somehow I won. So after 8 years period, I really helped small business owners, and I returned more than, actually a little less than $500 million back to the small business owners. So I achieved my version of American dream. I married to Sean Steele for 37 years of this September comes, who supports me no matter what I do. And he's been always on my side. And I have two beautiful daughters. I have my first daughter sitting here. She's Cheyenne. She's married to a naval officer, and she lives in San Diego. And she's going to start USC, if SC graduates here, fight on MBA this September, so I'm so proud of her. And then my second daughter, Siobhan, graduated from Georgetown, national security major, and she just got proposed by her boyfriend, so just engaged, so I'm very, very happy about that. As a first-generation immigrant, I am fortunate to have been elected to the Orange County Board of Supervisors, where I have a say in how to improve my community of 3.2 million residents. As an elected official, I have great respect for the US Constitution and the rule of law. My priority is to preserve an American dream, to have the freedom and opportunity to work hard, make a living, and raise a family in a safe neighborhood. It is because of President Nixon's decades of public service that I am able to achieve my American dream. He was an inspirational statesman who accomplished a lot in both Congress and at the White House. His actions have shaped the political environment that we all participate in today, whether it is supporting states' rights or war on drugs. We honor his contributions today, and I'm very grateful and I'm very honored to be here today. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you again, Supervisor Steele. Next, I'd like to welcome former Congressman Judge James P. Rogan. When Jim Rogan was 33 years old, he was appointed to the Glendale Municipal Court by the late, great George Dugmagian, another friend of the Nixon Library. Judge Rogan served in the California State Assembly, where he was ranked the #1 member in integrity and effectiveness. He went on to serve 2 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, where he was selected to be one of the lead prosecutors in the impeachment of President Clinton. Later, he served under President George W. Bush as the Undersecretary of Commerce. He returned to Orange County, where he rejoined the bench in 2006. Judge Rogan is the author of several books, including his 2014 memoir, And Then I Met, Stories of Growing Up, Meeting Famous People, and Annoying the Hell Out of Them. He is a great admirer of Richard Nixon and many of Judge Rogan's personal effects. Special mementos and artifacts that he has gathered over a lifetime are actually on display in our new exhibit opening this evening. They include pristine collector items from the 1968 Republican National Convention. Please join me in welcoming Judge Rogan.
So first, welcome to the Nixon Library. I'm delighted to be able to join you here. And if I may, if you'll, as we used to say in Congress, give me just a point of personal privilege. This November, my wife and I will be celebrating our 30th anniversary, my wife Christine. And it is such a personal honor for me to be here with Supervisor Michelle Steele. As she indicated, Sean, Michelle, and I have been friends for about 30 years. And what's really been fascinating and pleasurable for me over the decades is Sean, who was so active in politics, he went on to become the state Republican Party chair. He was the state chairman, California state chairman of the Republican Party, a member of the Republican National Committee, and for the first 15 years or so that I knew them, people would ask Michelle, "Are you Sean Steele's wife?" What I love is for the last 15 years, they've been asking him, "Are you married to Michelle?" So I just want to say, Michelle, thank you again for your tremendous public service. Now, those campaign buttons that you are wearing, most of you on your lapel, they were on your seats when you came in. Please keep those. They are original mementos from 1968. They are not reproductions. I can vouch for that because when I was in the 5th grade, I got them at the Nixon headquarters. And let me tell you how I got them. I was in the 5th grade, and somebody gave me a Bobby Kennedy campaign button the day of the California primary. I didn't like Bobby Kennedy, so I threw it in a drawer. That evening, he was shot, and as you know, he died within a day. I found the button, and I thought, you know, I ought to save this. It's a piece of history. A few weeks later, I went down to the Humphrey headquarters, and they gave me a campaign button. And so I started collecting presidential campaign memorabilia in 1968. And as Bill told you, I guess a lot of it will be on display. But what I wanted to tell you about these Nixon buttons is when I was 10 years old in the 5th grade, I lived in San Francisco. And we didn't know any Republicans. So I was a Humphrey guy. And in 2006, I was appointed to the board of directors here at the Nixon Library. I went to my very first board meeting, and they went around the table, and I met everybody, and they said, you know, we're going to talk about what we can do to extend the legacy of President Nixon. When they came to me, I said, well, I think that's really interesting because I'm the only guy at the table that was passing out brochures for Hubert Humphrey in 1968. That was my last board meeting, by the way. The Nixon buttons I got when I went to the Nixon campaign headquarters. When I'd ask people if they had campaign buttons, if the staff was watching, I took 1 or 2. If they weren't watching, I took the bag. The bag is here tonight, and that's why I want you to bring one. It's my penance to President Nixon. 50 years later, we're going to get those buttons in circulation. The last thing that I want to say, just following up on Bill's comments about President Nixon, most of the people in this room were not alive in 1968. And so all you know about the 1968 campaign is maybe what you've picked up in a book or you've heard and so forth. Richard Nixon didn't just have a comeback in 1968. Just to put it in perspective, he had not been elected to an office in his own right in 18 years. And in the 1960s, he lost 2 devastating campaigns, one against John F. Kennedy by a whisker in 1960. 2 years later, he lost in a blowout for governor of California. It was so bad, he left his home state of California, moved to New York, and in a little 500 square foot law office on Broad Street over the next several years, with a secretary and a couple of staffers, they put together the nucleus of a presidential campaign in 1968. And unlike these campaigns that we are used to seeing these days, I mean, look at in 2016, not to degrade anybody, but there were about 24 Democrat and Republican presidential candidates for president. And other than Hillary Clinton, who had been a first lady, Donald Trump, who had been a reality TV star and a real estate mogul, and Jeb Bush, who was the son and brother of a president, the other 20 or so got like 0 to 2% in the name recognition polls. Nobody had ever heard of most of these people. Richard Nixon didn't just have to come back from nowhere from defeat in 1968. The lineup of candidates in the 1968 election were unlike any lineup, I believe, in any election in American history. If you weren't there, listen. If you were there, you don't remember. The candidates running for president in one election against each other were the titans of the political field in the 1960s. Lyndon Johnson, Vice President Hubert Humphrey, Robert F. Kennedy, Eugene McCarthy, a little kooky, but he was still very interesting, Ronald Reagan, Nelson Rockefeller, 3-term governor of New York, George Romney, 3-term governor of Michigan, the only guy that John F. Kennedy told his staff just before his assassination, that's the guy I don't want to run against. I'm afraid of George Romney in 1964. And then the wild card of the campaign, George Wallace, who on the campaign trail made Donald Trump look like a panty waist. I mean, Wallace was the most incendiary political figure of my lifetime. Richard Nixon took them all on in turn, and he was the last man standing. It was not just a magnificent comeback, it was a magnificent campaign. And the leadership that he brought to that campaign and then to our country speaks from this library every day. It's a great legacy. The people here at the Nixon Library and the National Archives not only preserve the legacy of a president, they do a massive service to our Orange County community, and I thank them all for it. It's an honor to be here. Give those campaign buttons to your kids, grandkids, nieces, and nephews. Tell them they are a piece of history. And if they go to a campaign headquarters because they start collecting and nobody is looking and they steal the whole bag, wait till the statute of limitations runs and then they can admit it. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Rogan. You made a reference about this all starting when you were 6 years old? Yes, sir? You will like this next segment. At this time, I'd like to welcome the U.S. Naval Sea Cadets from the Colonel Lewis L. Millett Division. They're going to help us open our new exhibit by holding the ceremonial ribbon. Helping us cut the ribbon today is Cooper Freitag, a 6-year-old soon-to-be first grader from Murrieta. Cooper was inspired by the 2016 election and has made it his goal in his life to become President of the United States. Just like we have serious dates here. Cooper plans to run for president, he told us, in 2048 when he is 35. Helping Cooper cut the ribbon are his sisters, 13-year-old Riley and 11-year-old Ava. Could we have you all step forward? We've got a great picture up here, and I think there's signs that we can hold up as in the audience. Come forward. Please come forward. More people. Every 50 years we do this. Please come forward. You good? All set? All right, let's officially kick off this celebration. Cooper, please cut the ribbon.